So let's talk about the best farming methods you can do right now in Diablo 4. Obviously, we all love it when a new loot cave gets discovered, but in this guide, I also want to focus on some of the long-term goals that you should have. Whether you're looking for more sacred or ancestral gear, or just want to get more XP and push through the world tiers. Now, I want to focus a bit on the time-limited events, like the Legion events, the world bosses a bit, and kind of go over a few of the things that you should know about them, because they are legit some very good farming methods that you can do. They do not pop off too often, but when they do, they are definitely worth checking out, and at some point, you're going to want to pretty much drop everything and just go ahead and do them. You will usually see them on the map when they start spawning, as well as the countdown timer that tells you how much time you have left for this to spawn, and you will generally want to go there in advance and just be ready for everything. The first one I want to talk about is the Legion event, because if you are doing the mistake of ignoring this, thinking that it's not as good as a world boss, you are mistaken. It can literally give you a lot more loot than any world boss, assuming that you can complete it fully. So let me give you a quick breakdown of what this event is. Basically, once you reach this location, the event pops up and you're going to get a 1.45 minute timer that tells you to slay all enemies so that you can provoke the Servants of Hell. There are going to be 3 Servants of Hell in total that you can summon this way by slaying all the enemies in the allocated time. And once you do, this completes or activates the mastery of this event, at the end of which you get some really tough boss encounters, but also a lot more loot. Otherwise, if you're too slow at defeating all these enemies and summoning the Servants of Hell, you're not going to get that, so keep that in mind. However, on World Tier 4, where most of the players are completely optimized, this is literally a breeze, and if you get to play with a decent enough group, you can clear the entire area in no time. And if you do that, then the mini boss event spawns with that Servant of Hell. In this case, you kind of have to complete a couple of new objectives, at the end of which you get the Servant of Hell. And that's going to be 1 out of 1. You have to repeat this 3 times, every single time with a slight variation, because each Servant of Hell gets a slightly different summoning event. In one situation, you have to destroy some of these like pillars, in another one, some of these like tumors or whatever. But between all of these, you do have to defeat all the enemies in that allocated time. Otherwise, the event ends right there and you don't get the full loot. Once all of that is taken care of, this brings you to the final stage of the event, in which you have to defeat a number of very strong bosses in under 2 minutes. I believe there's one Hive Master, a Sea Hag, and probably one more that I'm forgetting right now. But essentially, if you defeat all of them in that allocated time, this will drop 3 massive loot chests on the ground in front of you, and they have a very good chance at giving you legendaries. Unless you are as unlucky as I was in this footage, but otherwise it's totally worth to do this, even for the other drops that you're getting, because there's tons of them, and more important, there's no weekly reset from what I know, so you can repeat these every time they pop off on the map. Now, it goes without saying that world bosses are also going to be extremely important, because you get that weekly cash that guarantees at least 1 legendary. Or again, if you're unlucky as I was, just a crap legendary, but still worth doing. On top of the one from Fractured Peaks, where we know that a Shava spawned in the betas, we also have this one right here in Kyrgyzstan, and there's also one right here in Howitzer that spawns any of the 3 existing world bosses. So it's not like a fixed position for each one of them. So this is something that you're going to want to always pop into and just go ahead and do them on the highest tier of difficulty that you can, so that you can get the max tier loot appropriate to your character right now. There's also a trick to repeat this boss in the exact same event, and in this case you will have to be transferring to a friend which is in a different instance of the same spawn location. Like you can see in this case, I got an invite from a friend that didn't finish the world boss just yet, so when I got to its instance, it was still available and I was able to get the rewards again. However, it only works for the drop rewards, so from the ones that actually physically appear from the boss's body once it's going down, and not the weekly legendary cash. That's going to be 1 time only per week, and there's, I believe, no way to duplicate it on a weekly basis. Anyway, let's keep on going and talk a bit about the Helltides. Previously, I had a pretty big gripe, and probably still have, with these, because I generally just find myself to be very unlucky when playing them. Literally, most of the loot I get from here is crap that ends up being salvaged or thrown, and I can just spend my time on something else and get much better loot. Not sure what that's all about, but all my friends have a ton of luck with these, so I wanted to cover them anyway and make them more efficient for you. First things first, to make them more efficient, obviously you're going to want to defeat as many enemies as possible in the shortest amount of time possible so that you can get those aberrant, well, ambers in this case, so that you can use them at the chests that spawn in the same area. That is why you're constantly going to want to be on the lookout for events, the orange ones appearing on the screen. And more important, to go to the events that also have other players inside of them. If you don't see them, maybe playing with a friend or joining a clan can help a ton with that, because the more players there are, the bigger the groups are going to be, so this means a lot faster loot. Another trick is to pop off a side mission inside of the Helltide event. Like for example, in this case, I picked off one from a nearby town that was inside of the area with the Helltide event, and this marked a location on the map where it showed a ton of enemies. So this can actually help a ton, again, to also give you a lot more embers as you're picking them off from the enemies that do happen to be inside of this side mission, instead of just randomly searching for events or randomly going from one group to another. This area was a little bit more packed than the usual. And the same goes with some of the whisper events too. Like if you're lucky enough and you have a few whisper events inside of the Helltide, such as for example some of the corpses or the ones where a lot of enemies get summoned into one location, this can also further help a ton with that. As the concentration of enemy increases, you also get a lot more resources. And since we talked about the whispers, here's a way to make them a lot more efficient. Recently, I switched from doing the dungeon inside of them, even though they give me 5 points, and instead focused on the medium and the small whispers. Specifically, always be on the lookout for the medium one, like these harvest events that give you 3 grim favors. The reason for that is because you can combine these with some of the one-pointers, such as, for example, defeating named enemies, or even better, this one in which you are required to complete an event in that location. That's because as you defeat these enemies for that event, they also drop the motes or the other resources which count for the harvest event, so you're doing both of them at the same time. Such as this one. In this case, I had a ton of enemies in this event, which also gave me 1 grim favor. But as you can see, there's tons of enemies, they all spawn quick and they always come to you. So it's super easy to harvest a lot of these resources that they drop. To the point that by the time I was done with this, I was also done with the harvest event, so I could just go ahead and deposit it. And this, ladies and gents, brings us to a couple of loot caves that I'm using right now that work really well. And depending on when you watch this video, these might or might not work any longer, so just keep that in mind. This is your disclaimer. But the first one is called Champion's Demise. This is a dungeon located right here in the KhrazeGaming region, very close to the town of Girandai nearby. Once you go inside of it, you're going to notice a huge amount of enemies. Like literally, I have not seen another dungeon with as many groups of enemies spawning at the same time. And this is true for the entire dungeon. It's made out of 3 main paths, and literally all these 3 roads are filled to the brim with huge packs of enemies. So much so that in fact you will need a pretty decent build, I might say so. I'm playing on World Tier 4, so even in this case, as you can see, my HP varies wildly. Luckily, my DPS was plenty enough, but you will get destroyed if you're not being careful. However, as you might have noticed, the drop rates are quite decent. As a matter of fact, you can find quite a nice number of legendaries here. But more important, you can also get ancestrals, you can also get sacred, at the very least if you're playing on at least tier 3 or tier 4 for the ancestrals. This is a good way to farm up and gear up your character. Like if you're looking for some really good items, it definitely works really well. But it will probably work even better if you farm this for XP as well. Like just pop off an XP potion or join a friend or two and split farm the entire dungeon. There are 3 main roads, as I've said, so each player can take each road to make things more efficient, a lot faster, and you should get these levels in no time. I do not, however, recommend completing the main objective. It's not needed and it's a complete waste of time. As soon as you are done with the enemy packs, either solo or in a group, just go ahead, leave the dungeon, and then leave the game, come back in, jump in the dungeon, and it should be completely reset. I'm not sure what other methods are better, but for me this worked the best and it is by far the fastest. Now, the second one is, as strange as it sounds, Morgan's Works. Yes, the same dungeon that got nerfed a few days ago, because from what I'm able to tell, it only got nerfed on normal mode. However, if you pop off a Nightmare dungeon, like how you can see me doing in this case, it seems that the packs of enemies are just as big as before. So if you are lucky enough and get a sigil that does affect this dungeon, then you can totally, and I suggest to go ahead, activate this and go ahead and play in it. The packs of enemies I believe that we had previously in the normal version were actually from the Nightmare version, so maybe that helps a bit explaining why it constantly spawned these large groups of elites. But I'm doing it right now. I literally did this morning, just a few hours ago, and it completely worked in the new update. I'm not sure if it's completely intended, but I can't think of a reason why it will not be, given that it is quite challenging. Just keep in mind that this is on the Nightmare version, in this case on the Torment difficulty, tier 21. So maybe that's what you also need to do to have these large groups of enemies. And at the same time, I don't think this is too broken anymore, because you're no longer going to be able to refresh this on repeat as before. You're going to, have to use the sigils and get inside, which is not as consistent. But that's pretty much it. Thanks so much for watching. If you know of any other method, let me know down below in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video.